Hello, welcome to this episode of Thoughts of a Whole Brain Man. And today we're looking at a couple of ideas from this book, The 12 Houses by Howard Sasportas. I love this book. This is the newly print version. So if you buy it on Amazon or something like that, it'll look like this. But I've had this older version for many years now. And Howard Sasportas was an astrologer who put together a remarkable body of work relating Greek myths with dynamics of astrology to illumine and deepen and enriching one's understanding of the concepts of not just astrology, but also of dynamics of ourselves, of the human psyche. And there were a couple of Greek myths he recounts, in fact, as a Greek myth, but also a Roman one and also a Mesopotamian one, that all allude to a part of astrology that we call in astrology Pluto, but a psychotherapist would call the structure or the dynamic of repression. A hypnotherapist would call abreactions or the recovery of repressed material back into conscious awareness. And I guess a modern day contemporary person might call triggers. Yes, everybody has these dynamics in their psyche. Some people have these dynamics at the surface and it's part of their daily world. For other people, they're in the background and they only encounter such things occasionally, and it's quite a shock when they do. But we'll start with a Greek myth. You may have heard of Hercules. You may not have heard that Hercules wasn't the original name. The original name was Heracles, and Heracles was the son of the goddess Hera. Hera was a goddess of wisdom. And she had a son who would one day become a god himself and sit at the table of the gods. But she was concerned that he might not earn his place appropriately. So she devised 12 tasks or labors, each of which he had to complete successfully in order to be able to join the gods of the great table on Olympus. These are known as the 12 labors of Hercules. So we'll use the Hercules name, okay? At the early part of the 20th century, a theosophist called Alice Bailey looked at these 12 labors and correlated them with signs of the zodiac, and suggesting, of course, that having an understanding of the 12 labors of Hercules could also give you a deeper understanding of the dynamic of certain signs of the zodiac. And the 8th sign of the zodiac is Scorpio. And the 8th labor of Hercules fits perfectly with the dynamics of Scorpio. Scorpio is a sign of the zodiac that's associated with a planet called Pluto, the god of the underworld, of change and transformation. We experience many deaths in life. The death of poverty is the birth of wealth, and the death of wealth is the birth of poverty. You know, summer passes into autumn, autumn dies and winter is born, and then winter fades away and spring is then born, and that passes into a new summer. Everything is in a constant state of dissipation and recreation, and the dynamic of all of that is represented in these symbols in the language of astrology. And by the language of astrology, I don't mean just charts and fate and destiny, but I mean using the symbolism of astrology to describe or define or refine an understanding of the human condition. In the 8th labor of Hercules, Hercules has to seek and find and destroy a monster called a Hydra. And the Hydra lives in a horrible, murky swamp. Now, a competent, good magician knows that water must flow to the sea. That is the natural order of things. And it's possible to have an understanding of how that process works and to perhaps alter and adjust the flow of the river. So you can bend the flow of the river so it irrigates this land over here. You can bend the flow of the river so it irrigates that land over there. But if you attempt to overly control the river, if you attempt to block the river, you dam it. And when you dam the river, you get a septic tank, a swamp. And it's in the swamp, in the toxicity and the poisons of the swamp, that the hydras grow and dwell. In Greek mythology, or in Greek cosmology, the realm of water was correlated with the human realm of feelings and what we would now call the unconscious or the psychic or spiritual. So in other words, when we have emotions, those emotions must flow out from us. And if we block the flow of emotions, we dam them. And it's when we dam the emotions, hold them in, block them in, that's when the monsters grow, the hydras, or in other words, the emotions of trauma, the toxicity, the self-poisoning of not allowing the emotions to release and therefore allow the healing to begin. So Hercules meets his guide at the gates of the land of the Hydra. He's wearing just a loincloth, and his guide gives him a club and a sword and says, remember these words: we rise by kneeling, we conquer by surrendering, and we gain by giving up. So with the words of his guide ringing in his ears, the gate of the land of the Hydra is opened, and Hercules goes in, and following the stench in the air, he soon finds the water where the Hydra lives. The Hydra is a monster that has 8 heads. Its blood is acid. Its breath is poisonous. As soon as he reached the water's edge, this monster loomed up before him, and just instinctively he cut off one of the heads with his sword. As soon as he did that, 3 more grew in its place, these heads swirling around, and he remembered the words of his guide. So he knelt down by the edge of the river, grabbed one of the heads, and lifted the whole beast up into the air. As he held the beast in the air, it started to wriggle and then wither and then die, because the beast drew all of its power, its life force, from the toxic water of the swamp, and removed from the source that supported it, it could no longer live anymore. In Greek cosmology, air is the realm of thought, of communication, of speaking, of listening, of writing. This myth shows that we can heal from wounds, quite literally, when we air the problem. It's 2,000 years old, and it describes the dynamics of psychotherapy. Isn't that cool? So the people of those times had the wisdom to understand the dynamic that takes place when we discuss things, when we talk about things, when we open up and let feelings come out. You know, and sometimes there are tears, and sometimes those tears can be a wailing howl. And yet, on the other side of the release of tears, a stillness begins, a quietness begins, a healing can take place, but not until all of the waters are cleansed from the heart. And the act of lending your ears to someone to say, this is a space where you can offload, This is a space where I will hold this for you. It's a beautiful thing for one human being to do for another. And we on occasion find ourselves doing this just naturally with our friends, loved ones, family, strangers. Some people just do that because they like to, and other people do it as a profession. Some people are trained to know how to hold deep trauma of another. And other people find that when they hear a person's terrible tragedy, that they can't shake it off, and now it traumas them. You have to take care with such things. And a bit of training and know-how means that you can be effective in the helping process. Now, another dynamic that explores these issues of Pluto is a much older myth than that of Greece. It comes from Mesopotamia, and it describes what's called the descent of Inanna. Inanna is a goddess of the heavens, a goddess of light, and she lives on mountain tops. She has a twin sister. Her twin sister, her name is Ereshkigal, and Ereshkigal translates as the Lady of the Great Place Below. She's kind of like a proto-Pluto, if you like, an earlier matriarchal form of Pluto. And Inanna gets a message one day that her sister, Ereshkigal, is in trouble. Her husband has died, and she's in deep mourning. So it's, incumbent upon Inanna to visit her sister and, pay commiserations. But this means going down into the underworld. Now, you don't just wander into the underworld. Well, you might, but it's not a good idea. No, in order to get into the underworld, you have to pass through 7 layers or portals. And each one of these 7 layers or portals, you must relinquish something to which you are adorned. And that word adorned is an interesting word. An adornment is something that we believe is a part of us, but in actual fact, we can remove it and we still survive. So, for example, for some people, that might be their job. And if they lose their job, if they get made redundant, their world crashes down inside their thinking, and yet somehow they survive. For some people, it's a relationship. And if we lose that person from our lives, we feel as if our life is shattered and can never be rebuilt. For other people, it's a status. For other people, it's their team. For other people, it's the band that they follow. For other people, it's a religion or a god or a deity or a guru. Right? We all have things to which we become attached that we believe serve us. But in actual fact, we can still survive when they no longer serve us anymore and we are free from them. There's a difference between an adornment and a necessity. It's very important to know the difference between an adornment and a necessity. Okay? Yes, the necessities of life are essential. The adornments are, well, nice, but, not necessarily essential. Now, an interesting thing is that in antiquity, before we polluted everything with light pollution and those orange lights, street lights, when you have complete clarity of the sky, you can see 7 planets with your eye. With the naked eye, we can see as far out as Saturn, but then beyond Saturn, one needs a telescope. So in antiquity, people noticed that the star canopy moves in one direction, but the planets move in the other direction. The word planet comes from the Greek word planetes, which means wanderer. And the planets were seen as mavericks, these lights that would go the other direction, the other way. So I find it interesting that it's said, there are 7 planets, but there are also 7 veils in the dance, the 7 veils, 7 chakras, 7 musical notes, 7 portals through which one must pass. There may be a correlation between the number of planets and the significance of their meaning and the significance of each of the nature of the portals that we go through. That's for a theologian and a philosopher to discuss. I guess those are just my notions of relating these things. But Inanna, like everybody, on her way down to her sister, releases or relinquishes a different thing to which she's adorned. And having done possibly the last of these portals, she is naked and bowed low before her sister. Her sister, Ereshkigal, is a dark goddess, and so she rewards Inanna's visit by killing her and hanging her on a meat hook to rot. She's the dark goddess, right? Now, Inanna knew that she was going to meet her sister, who's a dark goddess. You don't just blunder in if you have wisdom. So she took some preparation in the guise of some small androgynous creatures called mourners. And these androgynous creatures called mourners were taught to affirm the life force, no matter how it presents itself. And Ereshkigal wasn't just in mourning for the death of her husband, she was also pregnant and having a difficult birth. In other words, in life we find that when something dies or a chapter ends, a new chapter begins. There is a new life that follows the closing of the old. The mourners noticed that this was taking place, and of course Ereshkigal was cursing and swearing and bitching and moaning. So like some kind of Rogerian therapy, they joined in, and they started cursing and bitching and swearing and moaning along with her. And so grateful was she to be accepted in her misery that she offered them any gift they wanted. And of course they asked for Inanna to be revived, and Inanna returned to the upper heavens with a little bit more self-illumination and a little bit more wisdom in the process. So through our lives, we have periods of breakdown. We have periods where things that we thought would always support us collapse, and we realize that they don't. If you want a great leveler as a piece of philosophy, there are two things that come to mind. One is that there are no structures. Everything is a dissipating process. It's just happening at a very slow pace. The city you live in will one day be dust. The empire that we know, this electrical, post-industrial empire of modernity, will fade one day. It won't be here. Even the planet we're standing on won't be here. Approximately 5 billion years from now, our sun will explode and it won't be here anymore. Everything that you know and touch and see and smell and taste is a dissipating process. Some of these processes happen in such a rapid time you can observe them, and some of them are so slow that you're not even aware that they are changing, but they are changing. And remembering the fact that everything is an impermanence can help when you suddenly encounter change. Another thing that can help is something John Lennon once said: life is what happens when you're planning other things. And so we can have plans and therefore expectations, and sometimes they work, in which case we have euphoria, and sometimes they don't work, in which case we have disappointment. To a certain extent, human beings set themselves up for disappointment, especially if our expectations do not match the reality. Yes, getting one's expectations to be accurate in terms of correlating with the reality around us is an art that many of us are attempting to master, it would seem. Yes. But these processes of breakdown, change, and renewal do happen in people's lives. And some lives, it seems, seem to kind of roll along on these themes. And other people seem to have a life that's almost like a Midas touch. And they go for long periods before they experience any kind of collapse or breakdown. But because each of us, all of us, experience change on some level, whether it's practical, emotional, psychological, intellectual, political, economical, etc., when we experience or observe other people going through their processes of change and transformation, it enables us, or it allows us, to have the possibility of empathizing or sympathizing with their position. And if we talk about our experiences, then we can release some of that toxic water from our hearts. And we can then find that the hydras of our traumas are less virulent than they were before, or maybe even completely pacified and transformed. Yes, some myths that may help with dealing with shadows and breakdowns and change and transformation. It is cyclic, you know. Everything revolves in cycles. And at some stage during these, we'll talk about past life regression as well, a much broader, longer cycle of our experiences. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you for having listened to these thoughts of a whole brain man, and look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye.